In the olden days, if you wanted to do anything clever in CSS, like using variables, you really only had one option, a CSS preprocessor. Preprocessors like less and SASS use their own syntax that extends the language of CSS, and then they run on the command line in Node.js to compile it down to raw CSS for displaying on your page. Less and SASS both have a concept of variables. So that means once you've picked, say, a hex code for a color, you don't need to copy that hex code all through your CSS. You can just store it in a variable and then reference it somewhere else in your style sheets. Variables make it super easy to tweak a style, as you only need to change it in one place, and then you recompile the CSS using a preprocessor, and that will change it everywhere. And this is a feature that for a long time developers were crying out to have added into the CSS spec natively. But now, thanks to the adoption in most browsers of CSS variable support, that's exactly what you can do natively. CSS variables, which are also known as custom properties, enable you to store specific values for reuse throughout a document, just like you would have done in a preprocessor like SASS or less. The syntax is slightly different though. Variables are declared using the double dash syntax like this. Once declared, the variable can be used elsewhere in the document by referencing its name with the var function. So in this example here, a CSS variable called main_color is declared in the root element, and it's then used as a value for the background property in the header class. You can load this CSS directly into a modern browser and it will work natively. You don't need to do any pre-compilation or anything like that. This is valid CSS by itself. So let's take another look at another example. Consider a website where you want to maintain a consistent padding throughout different elements. Instead of repeatedly hard coding that value, you can use a CSS variable. So here, we've set a CSS variable to main padding at the root level. This value is then referenced in the container, sidebar, and footer classes. If ever you want to change the padding, you just update that --main padding variable, and all the associated styles will adjust accordingly. Variables set in the root selector are globally available, but you can also define variables within other selectors to limit their scope. So here, the main padding variable is declared in the root scope, so it's available to all classes, but the scoped color variable is declared inside that container class. So this means you can only use this color variable inside the scope of that CSS class. So this is handy if you want to declare variables that you don't want to pollute your entire project with. You just want to use them in one component or one class. While using the var function, you can also provide a fallback value in case the variable hasn't been defined. This can be particularly useful for progressive enhancement or when dealing with potential overrides. So in this example, if box color hasn't been defined, the background color will default to this white color here. So lastly, a quick note on browser support. I showed you this screenshot from caniuse.com earlier, and I'll add a link to this in the description below. But because CSS variables rely on the browser actually being able to read these variables and apply them in your CSS, you need to be loading this in a CSS supported modern browser. So currently that is over 95% of all browsers in use, but it's not 100. So think carefully if you need to really target that extra 4% of browsers. So do think if there's a way that you can make your site look good enough without those CSS variables. It's always good practice to check browser compatibility and have fallbacks in place if necessary. CSS variables provide a powerful native method of creating reusable and dynamic styles in your web applications. They offer a balance of the benefits from preprocessors while still being native CSS. And with good practices, you can harness their full potential to make your style sheets more efficient and more maintainable. So I hope this has been helpful. Here's a link to another introductory video for front-end web developers where I go over every tag that you can put inside the HTML head. So why not watch this next, and I'll see you right there. Take care.